As the American media obsesses over Helsinki and President Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin, there's some news that has received scant attention. Israelis spent hours hunkered down in the safety of bomb shelters after Palestinians launched a barrage of rockets against them from Gaza. It was the biggest attack since the Gaza War of 2014. Now, here to discuss this and more is Israel's representative to the United Nations. He's Ambassador Danny Danon. Mr. Ambassador, welcome. It's glad to have you here at CBN this time.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, so tell me about this. The media didn't pay a lot of attention to it. What we did see in the media was criticism of Israel. How do you handle this situation? What do you do to minimize the threat?
Pick any country in the world and imagine that in one weekend you would have 200 rockets flown into that city. It will be everywhere in the news. That's what happened last weekend in Israel. More than 200 mortars and missiles came from Gaza into our cities, tried to hit innocent Israelis, and it was anywhere. It is unfortunate. It shows the double standard that Israel is being treated, not only at the UN, but also by the international media. But we are strong. We will prevail, and we are very optimistic because we have a strong army that defends our people.
Well, I was going to ask you, so what do you do about it? How do you minimize this threat against Israel coming from Gaza?
Our policy is very clear. If the children in southern Israel are not able to sleep at night, the Hamas terrorists will not be able to sleep at night. We used our mighty army, we used our air force, and we targeted military facilities of Hamas, a terrorist organization. But I ask more. When I will go to the UN, I will demand that they will designate Hamas as a terrorist organization. The same way you designated Al-Qaeda and ISIS, Hamas should be on the list of the terror organizations.
I think Hezbollah is also on that list for the U.S., is it not?
For the U.S., not for the UN.
Yeah.
In the UN, they cannot even name Hezbollah or Hamas. They cannot say, let's condemn those organizations. They are afraid from facing those evil forces.
Your Knesset just recently passed legislation declaring that Israel is actually a Jewish state. What's wrong with that?
That's a fact. It's obvious. Like in the US, you have a constitution. In Israel, we do not have a constitution. We have basic laws. And this law actually speaks about the character of Israel. It speaks about our national anthem, about our flag, about our language. Israel is a full democracy. Muslim, Christian, and Jews have the same equal rights. So there is no problem with this legislation, but some people cannot recognize Israel as a Jewish state. That's why they are against any kind of legislation.
Well, so what do you do about that? Do you just...
We continue to thrive. We continue to educate our children. We continue to build our economy. And at the same time, we have a strong army to defend ourselves. We cannot live according to the expectations of our adversaries at the UN. We see a lot of hypocrisy coming mainly from European countries who tend to blame Israel for everything. And I think when they look at the reality today, they understand Israel is not the problem. Israel is a solution for the problems in the Middle East.
President Trump at his Helsinki summit with Vladimir Putin said that relations between Israel and Russia have improved, that there's a good relationship between Bibi Netanyahu, your prime minister, and also Vladimir Putin. So what has the difference been? How has that changed Israel and the Middle East, having a better relationship with Russia?
For us, it's important to have a strong relationship with everybody. The U.S. is the strongest ally. It will always will be our strongest ally. I feel it every day at the UN, working with Ambassador Haley. But it's important for us to speak also with the Russians, mainly about Syria, because we know that the Iranians, they want to stay in Syria. They want to take over Syria. We think it will be a threat not only for Israel, but also for other countries in the region, and we should not allow the Iranians to take over Syria. Look what happened in Lebanon. Today, the Iranians control Lebanon. They have the Hezbollah forces next to our border. We don't want to have a similar reality in the border with Syria. This is the message that Prime Minister Netanyahu delivered to Mr. Putin.
So a lot of suffering in 6.5 years in Syria. How do we bring about the end of that war? Is Russia the key? What's the key to end it?
First, I agree with you. We look at the pictures, we see the devastation. We are trying to help people in Syria. And I took a delegation of ambassadors with me to Israel, and we met with Syrian refugees. And they were shocked to hear the refugees speaking about Jews in Israel supporting Muslims in Syria. So we do whatever we can, and we hope that there will be some kind of stability in Syria. But at the same time, We don't want the Iranian to be next to our border.
Yes, we saw in Dara the Israelis helping people who had long considered Israel their enemy, reaching out and helping them, humanitarian aid workers from Israel.
We have a special project, it's called Good Neighbor, where we provide humanitarian support, tents, medical equipment, food, and we deliver it directly to the people who need it next to our border. And yes, they are surprised, but you know, we are all human beings. We cannot sit idly by when we see those pictures.
The U.S. has enacted legislation, I think back in December, called the Taylor Force Act. And what that did is it ended the pay to slay U.S. taxpayer support of Palestinians. In turn, there were the Palestinian Authority giving money to terrorists and the families of terrorists. We ended that. What's the effort like getting other countries to follow suit?
This is very important. We need to understand it. When you have the Palestinian Authority, which is a kind of a government, takes funds from the government and pay terrorists to kill innocent Israelis a monthly salary. It can be up to $3,000 a month for life. And they're taking international aid support and use that money to pay the families of terrorists. I think it was a very important legislation. In Israel, we have a similar legislation, and we saw Australia joining the US, and hopefully other countries will do the same. We encourage people to support humanitarian projects, but you should not support the culture of hate of the Palestinians.
Now, so far, is it just the U.S. and Australia, or other countries, Western countries, coming along?
So now it's the US and Australia, but we hear about some other European countries considering to divert their support to other places.
Well, are you optimistic about that, or?
I am, but we have to listen to the Palestinians. They say it very clearly. Despite all the legislations, we will continue to pay salaries to terrorists. Nevertheless, what will be the outcome? So they will take funds from other projects, schools, infrastructure, and they will divert them into paying salaries for terrorists. This is a bad message for the next generation of Palestinians growing up today in Judea and Samaria.
You know, when I met you in New York earlier this year, you seemed very like you're an optimist. You seem very optimistic about the future and the prospects for peace in the Middle East and between Israel and the Palestinians. Now, with all this Gaza situation going on, you know, we saw the rushing of the border and crossing and infiltrating into Israel at the time of the Jerusalem embassy dedication, the U.S. embassy in Jerusalem. Also, we saw the kites, the arson fires that began into Israel as a result of Palestinians sending those kites in. Now, most recently, the rockets. So are you still optimistic? How do you feel about the prospects for peace?
First, you have to be optimistic. You have to be a believer to survive in the United Nations. Yeah. And I'm optimistic because look what we achieved in short 70 years. We had wars, we had terror attacks. But despite all of those attacks and hatred, we built a miracle, a beautiful, thriving democracy in our region. So I think we will continue to do that. But at the same time, we have to make sure we have a strong army. We have to be grateful for our friends in the US standing with Israel, supporting Israel. We need that support because Hamas is not going anywhere. Hezbollah, they will stay there. And Iran is still there. So we will have challenges in the future, but at the same time, we have the capability to face those challenges.
Now, before you leave, I know you're on a tight schedule. I've got to ask you about Ireland, because the Irish are considering a bill right now that would ban all products from the so-called settlements in the West Bank, and then punish anyone, any company or any individual who does business with Israel with those products. What are the ramifications of that legislation, not only for Israel, but for the United States and our companies?
I hope it will not pass. It's not going to help anyone. You know, some countries in Europe believe that they can force a peace agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis. So they will force us to give land or to divide Jerusalem. It doesn't work that way. In order to achieve peace, you need to negotiate directly. We proved it when we negotiated with Egypt and Jordan. So they cannot impose anything. Second, they will hurt the Palestinians because many Palestinians work in the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, in industrial areas. So now, when they will actually start to boycott, they will boycott Palestinian workers. And third, they will hurt the people of Ireland because the US passed legislation that you are not allowed to boycott any country. The government can decide whom to boycott. So those companies will have to decide whether they are boycotting the US or they're boycotting Israel. I think they would choose not to boycott Israel.
Okay, we're out of time, and I know you have to go. The Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, a representative for Israel, Danny Danon, thank you so much for being with us. Good to see you again. God bless you.